I killed 2 people. I just wanted to do it. It was a quiet moment in the courtroom, but Wade Wilson's words shattered that silence. I killed 2 people. I just wanted to do it. His voice was flat, unemotional, as though he were explaining something mundane. No remorse, no fear, just a simple, cold admission. He said it like he was stating a fact, not confessing to something that would destroy so many lives. Wilson's biological father, Stephen Tessica, sat just a few feet away from him. His face remained unreadable at first, but the toll of those words hit him like a freight train. The man who had once tried to save his son from himself now sat across from a killer. Tessica's mind was racing. He had never expected to hear his son speak those words, at least not with such indifference. It wasn't just the shock of the confession, it was the complete lack of remorse, the terrifying absence of humanity in Wilson's voice. There was no explanation, no attempt to justify or rationalize the murders, just a cold declaration, as if it was no more significant than a trivial statement. I just wanted to do it. That was all Wilson offered, and it sent a chill through the courtroom. Those few words would stay with everyone in the room long after the trial was over.
As soon as those words left Wilson's mouth, the entire room seemed to freeze. The air thickened, and the quiet hum of the courtroom felt almost suffocating. People shifted uneasily in their seats, unsure how to respond to what had just been revealed. The judge, Circuit Judge Nicholas Thompson, remained composed, though his eyes betrayed a brief flash of disbelief. He'd heard confessions before, but there was something uniquely disturbing about Wilson's tone, something that felt hollow and unsettling. He didn't need to say anything right away. His silence alone carried weight. The prosecutor, who had been prepared to argue the case, now found himself at a loss for words. How could you argue against someone who had already confessed, with such chilling honesty, to 2 murders? It was as though the case had shifted from legal proceedings to something more sinister, something raw and real. In the back, the victims' families who had been holding on for years to the hope that they would get justice were now confronting a reality they weren't prepared for. Some buried their faces in their hands. Others stared at Wilson, trying to make sense of what they were hearing. The grief was palpable. This wasn't just a murder trial anymore. It was the end of a long battle for answers.
As the silence stretched, the emotional weight in the room intensified. This was no longer a courtroom drama. This was real life. A family was forever broken, and the man responsible for it was sitting right there, indifferent to their pain. Judge Thompson finally spoke, his voice cutting through the stillness. "Mr. Wilson, do you understand the gravity of what you just said?" The question seemed almost unnecessary. It was clear Wilson knew exactly what he was doing. The real question was, how could anyone be this detached? And just like that, the trial had taken a dark turn. The confession had opened a window into a mind that most people could never comprehend. The trial would go on, but the true horror had already been laid bare. The chilling details of the murders will leave you speechless. In 2019, Wade Wilson brutally murdered 2 women in a single night, Kristine Melton and Diane Ruiz, shocking Florida to its core. On October 7, 2019, Wade Wilson met Kristine at a bar. After a seemingly normal night, he murdered her in her own home without warning, strangling her as she slept. The chilling part, was he was cold enough to steal her car and move on to his second victim, Diane Ruiz. After abducting her, he strangled her, ran her over with her own car, and left her body behind. The details were horrifying, but what made this case even more disturbing was Wilson's complete lack of remorse and the fact that he did it just because. His cold confession would come years later, and in 2024, he was sentenced to death for his heinous crimes. His trial, media coverage, and the grisly details surrounding the murders kept the public captivated, revealing a man who appeared harmless on the outside, but was capable of unimaginable violence.
But Wilson's story doesn't end with those two murders. This video will dive deeper into how a seemingly normal child, once raised in a loving home, transformed into a cold-blooded killer. What drove him to kill? Was it his history of brain injuries, his troubled adolescence, or something far darker that was always lurking inside? We'll explore the warning signs that were missed, the psychological factors that played a role in his descent into violence, and the emotional toll this case took on everyone involved, especially the families of the victims. Stick with us as we break down the complex layers of Wilson's psyche and how he went from a troubled teen to a man capable of cold, calculated murder. If you're watching this, you're about to witness a case like no other. The story of Wade Wilson is not just about a brutal crime. It's about the terrifying transformation of a man from seemingly normal to shockingly violent. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more in-depth stories about the darkest true crime cases out there, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And if you won't subscribe, kindly tell us why in the comments section. We will love to know. Trust me, this case is just the beginning. There's so much more to uncover about Wilson's psyche and the shocking details behind these murders. This case isn't just another whodunit you can figure out within the first few minutes. The truth behind Wade Wilson's actions goes far deeper. This is a story about the psychological unraveling of a man, the missed signs, and the chilling truth of what led to his horrific crimes. As we dive deeper into Wilson's past, we'll reveal the disturbing reasons behind his violent acts and explore how he went from a young boy with a bright future to someone capable of cold-blooded murder. Stick with us as we unravel the complexities of this case and try to make sense of a mind that had already been lost long before he took those lives.
Wade Wilson's story began like many others, adopted at an early age by Steve and Candace Wilson, a couple in Tallahassee who had longed for a son. Born to two teenagers who couldn't care for him, Wilson, originally named Anthony, found his way into a home that seemed perfect. His new parents, churchgoers who prided themselves on family values, were overjoyed to welcome him into their lives. For the first 11 years of his life, everything seemed to fall into place. He was athletic, well-adjusted, and performed well in school. He fit into the family seamlessly. Those who knew him at the time remembered him as active, engaged, and seemingly full of promise. But it didn't take long for something to go terribly wrong. It started with paranoia. At age 13, Wilson began to change. He was no longer the happy, energetic child his parents had raised. He became convinced that people were watching him. His father recalls how he would obsessively close all the blinds in the house, insisting that there were entities hiding in the garage. When the police were called, nothing was found, but Wilson's delusions continued to grow stronger. This wasn't just typical teenage rebellion. Something deeper was at play. His personality, once open and warm, began to take on an edge, one that no one saw coming. And it didn't stop there. It escalated. By 16, Wilson was no longer just distant, he was violent. The once promising teenager now had a history of violent outbursts, including car theft, burglary, and assault.
As the years went on, his behavior grew more erratic and disturbing. Wilson had always been a good student, but now he was becoming known for the wrong reasons. His parents, though concerned, couldn't pinpoint what had changed. The warning signs were clear, but they were unable to connect the dots. What followed would be the first steps in a dangerous escalation, one that would eventually lead to 2 innocent women losing their lives. Wilson's transformation wasn't sudden. It was a slow, terrifying unraveling of a mind that had been shattered long before the murders ever took place. And as his life spiraled out of control, the world around him had no idea just how dangerous he had become. Wade Wilson's descent into violence didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual process, one fueled by his escalating paranoia and compounded by a series of brain injuries that changed the course of his life. His teenage years were marked by bizarre behaviors, paranoia that seemed to appear out of nowhere. He was convinced that people were watching him, that unseen forces were closing in on him. But this wasn't just typical teenage angst. It was the beginning of something far darker. Wilson's mind was already beginning to fracture. The brain injuries he suffered at a young age played a significant role in this unraveling. 4 documented concussions, 2 car accidents, multiple sports injuries, and violent assaults that left him unconscious each time shaped the man he would become. Dr. Mark Rubino, a neurologist who reviewed Wilson's case, noted that these injuries particularly damaged his frontal lobe and amygdala, the parts of the brain responsible for impulse control and emotional regulation. When these areas are damaged, it can cause severe problems with emotional control, aggression, and decision-making, Dr. Rubino explained. People like this can act out violently without understanding the consequences.
This damage didn't excuse his actions, but it played a crucial role in explaining his inability to control his impulses. Wilson's brain was literally wiring him for violence. He began to lose control of his temper, acting on angry impulses without any regard for the consequences. His descent was slow at first, but unmistakable. Stealing cars, committing burglaries, and later escalating to assaults. These were no longer just teenage mistakes. These were the actions of someone who was spiraling out of control. The slow burn of violence became Wilson's defining trait. At first, it was small acts, petty thefts, driving stolen cars, breaking into homes. These were signs of a young man with little regard for laws or other people's rights. But his criminal behavior wasn't limited to theft. By the age of 16, Wilson was already facing serious charges. A failed murder-for-hire plot in 2018 showed just how far he was willing to go. The desperation to commit violence for money was alarming, but it wasn't until he strangled his ex-girlfriend in February 2019 that his actions truly crossed the line into something irreversible. No one knew it at the time, but this wasn't just a domestic argument gone wrong. It was a glimpse of the killer Wilson would soon become. His actions didn't stop there. The violence escalated. Strangulation attempts turned into cold-blooded murder. Property crimes became assaults, and eventually, murder was just another line Wilson crossed. His early life was marked by a sense of promise, but by the time he was 22, he had become a predator, a ticking bomb whose violent tendencies were no longer hidden beneath the surface. Wilson was becoming more dangerous with each passing day, and yet people around him, his adoptive parents, law enforcement, even his ex-girlfriends, had failed to connect the dots, unable to see the deadly pattern forming in front of them. Kristine Melton was 35 years old, a woman with a bright future and a loving heart.
She worked as a nurse at a local hospital in Fort Myers, Florida, where she was known for her compassion and dedication to her patients. Kristine had always been the person people could rely on, whether it was a friend needing a shoulder to cry on or a patient needing comfort during a tough time. She was a daughter, a sister, and a friend who loved fiercely, often putting others before herself. Her friends remember her for her warmth and infectious smile, always the one who could lighten the mood with just a few words. Kristine had this way of making everyone feel special, said her close friend Stephanie Sailors. She was the kind of person who made you believe everything would be okay. It didn't matter how tough things were, she was always there with a smile. That smile was what made her so easy to love, but it was also the one thing her friends would never see again. On the night of October 7, 2019, Kristine was just like any other woman out for a night of fun. She had gone to a local bar with her close friend Stephanie to enjoy some live music. They laughed, talked, and unwittingly crossed paths with the man who would take her life just hours later. That night, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Kristine had just celebrated her birthday a few weeks earlier, surrounded by friends and family, feeling like everything was finally falling into place. But that night, when she left the bar, it would be her last. Diane Ruiz was 43, a mother, a sister, and a friend. She worked as a bartender at a local restaurant and was known for her quick wit and infectious laughter. Diane was the heart of her family, especially to her 2 children, who she loved deeply. She wasn't just a mother, she was a protector, a guiding light for her kids, always putting their needs above her own. Diane's family described her as someone who would go to the ends of the earth to ensure her children had everything they needed.
She was the kind of mother who would drop everything for her kids, said her brother, Felix Ruiz. She had a way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the world when you were with her. She wasn't just a mother, she was a force of nature, and she had an entire family who loved her beyond measure. On the morning of October 7th, 2019, Diane was walking to work. The last thing on her mind was that she was about to cross paths with a predator. Wilson, in a calculated move, approached her under the guise of needing directions. He used that moment to get close enough to grab her, dragging her into Melton's stolen car and driving her to an isolated area. But Diane wasn't just a victim, she fought back, with every ounce of strength she had, trying to escape. But Wilson's grip was unrelenting. Diane didn't stand a chance. The devastation that followed the murders of Kristine and Diane was unimaginable. When their families received the tragic news, it felt like their entire worlds had crumbled in an instant. For Kristine's family, the call came from a detective, but nothing could prepare them for the shock that would follow. Her mother, who had always been so proud of her daughter, couldn't believe what she was hearing. "I thought it was a mistake. I thought there was some sort of mix-up," Kristine's mother said through tears. "How could this happen to my daughter? She was kind-hearted, always trying to make others happy."
For Diane's family, the news was just as harrowing. Her brother, Felix Ruiz, still remembers the moment the police arrived at his doorstep. "I thought they were here to tell me there was a mistake, but then they said her name, and I felt like I couldn't breathe," he recalled. "She was everything to me, my sister, my friend, and just like that, she was gone." The grief felt by both families was raw, overwhelming, and impossible to comprehend. For Kristine's mother, there was the added horror that she couldn't accept her daughter was gone. She still believed Kristine was alive, living in a state of denial, unable to face the brutal reality. She couldn't believe it. She kept asking where Kristine was. She'd even set a place for her at dinner, thinking she was just out late, Kristine's cousin, Samantha, shared. The pain of losing a child is unimaginable, but the confusion and denial that followed made the loss even harder to bear. Diane's children were left without a mother, forced to grow up too quickly, without the woman who had always been their rock. Felix Ruiz described how his nephew, just a teenager at the time, struggled with the loss. The worst part for him was seeing all the things she would never be there for. His graduation, his first car. She was always supposed to be there. Every milestone from that point on would be missing her presence, and the weight of that absence would linger long after the funeral.
The impact on both families wasn't just the loss of their loved ones, it was the crushing realization that they would never have the chance to speak to them again, to hug them, or to hear their voices. The pain of that void was something no one could ever truly understand unless they had lived it themselves. Kristine and Diane weren't just victims, they were real people with families who loved them, and the brutal way they were taken from their loved ones will never be forgotten. The night of October 7, 2019 seemed like any other for Kristine Melton. It was just another evening out with her close friend, Stephanie Sailors, at the Buddha Live Bar in Fort Myers, Florida. The dim lighting, the soft clink of glasses, and the hum of people talking and laughing filled the space. A live band played in the corner, setting a relaxed, upbeat tone. The music was smooth, the crowd was lively but laid back, and the air had that familiar bar scent, mixed drinks, faint perfume, and the unmistakable tang of sweat and smoke. Nothing about the night seemed out of the ordinary. As Kristine and Stephanie chatted, enjoying a drink, they caught the attention of a man sitting at the bar, Wade Wilson. He didn't seem like much at first glance, just another guy at a bar, blending into the crowd. His demeanor was friendly, even charming, and he quickly struck up a conversation with the two women. He wasn't forceful or aggressive, just casual small talk. He seemed harmless, like any other stranger who would buy you a drink and talk about the weather. The type of guy you'd forget about the next day. But that was the danger. He was normal. He blended in, made them feel at ease, and slowly wormed his way into their trust. After the night wound down and the bar began to empty, Stephanie left. Kristine decided to head home. She had no idea it would be the last time she'd walk out of that bar, alive and unscathed. As she drove home, the streets outside felt empty. The noise of the bar still echoed in her mind, but soon the world outside seemed quiet, too quiet. When Kristine got home, she was blissfully unaware that her life was about to end. As she entered her bedroom, Wilson followed her inside. His calm demeanor was chilling. There was nothing about him that screamed danger. No loud outbursts, no visible rage. It was the stillness in his eyes, the calculated calmness that made him dangerous. He waited until Kristine had settled into bed, the night air cool against the open window. Then, in an instant, it happened. Without warning, Wilson lunged. His hands closed around Kristine's throat. She struggled, fighting, scratching, doing everything she could to break free. But she didn't stand a chance. The medical examiner later confirmed that her fingernails had been broken in her desperate attempt to survive. Each crack a final effort to escape from the man who had deceived her just hours earlier. Her face, bruised and battered, told the story of a struggle that had no winner. Her body lay lifeless in her bedroom, an innocent woman in the place she should have felt safest. Wilson didn't panic. He didn't rush. After he killed her, he calmly rifled through her things, took her car keys, and left her body behind in that quiet bedroom. The room was still, save for the faint scent of sweat and the pungent, unmistakable scent of death beginning to fill the air.
Wilson stole her car, an unassuming white Nissan Sentra, and drove away, the blood of his victim still fresh on his clothes. But this wouldn't be the end. It wasn't enough to simply end Kristine's life. He was already thinking ahead, looking for his next victim. The coldness of his actions reflected the total absence of empathy or regret. There was no remorse in his eyes, no fear in his heart, just the empty satisfaction of having carried out his twisted desires. The investigation into the murders of Kristine Melton and Diane Ruiz began the moment their bodies were discovered. The police were quick to focus on Wilson, but it wasn't until they received a crucial tip that the case truly gained traction. Wilson had made the fatal mistake of calling his biological father, Stephen Teseka, shortly after the murders. In a calm, unsettling tone, Wilson confessed, saying, "I killed 2 people. I just wanted to do it." Teseka, horrified by his son's words, immediately contacted the authorities. Detective Sarah Williams, the lead investigator on the case, quickly pieced together the timeline. Surveillance footage from the bar confirmed Wilson had been in the area the night of the murders. His DNA, found on both victims, sealed his fate. But what was even more shocking was that Wilson's phone records revealed something chilling. He had been in contact with a known hitman just hours before the murders took place, an individual who had been linked to several cold cases. The police were stunned. This was no longer just a random act of violence. It was becoming clear that Wilson's actions were part of a much darker pattern. Within 48 hours of Teseka's tip, Wilson was arrested. It was a swift capture, but the emotional weight of the case would haunt everyone involved for years.
The trial began months later, and the courtroom quickly became a battleground. Prosecutor Karen Wells presented the case with compelling evidence: Wilson's confession, the DNA match, and testimony from witnesses who had seen him at the bar. But the most chilling moment came when Felix Ruiz, Diane's father, delivered a statement that would leave everyone in tears. "I will be there at the execution," he promised, locking eyes with Wilson. The weight of those words crushed the courtroom's atmosphere as the father vowed to be present at the moment of justice, holding the man accountable for his daughter's murder. On the defense side, Wilson's lawyer, trying to find some form of sympathy for his client, brought in expert testimony about Wilson's brain injuries, attempting to paint him as a product of his traumatic past. But Dr. Mark Rubino, the neurologist who had examined Wilson's brain scans, disagreed. "Brain injury alone doesn't create killers," Dr. Rubino said. The defense's attempt to reduce Wilson's responsibility was met with skepticism, but they pressed on, arguing that his mental state had contributed to his violent outbursts. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Wilson's demeanor throughout the trial only added to the unease. While the families of the victims wept and the prosecution fought for justice, Wilson sat impassive, unmoved by the pain he had caused. His smug expression never wavered as the evidence piled up against him. His eyes would occasionally flicker toward the families in the courtroom, but there was no remorse, no apology, just cold indifference.
The victims' families couldn't contain their grief. Kristine Melton's mother was visibly shaken, clutching her tissues, unable to even look at the man who had taken her daughter. Felix Ruiz, Diane's father, had to leave the courtroom several times to regain his composure. The anger, the sorrow, they were all too much to bear in the same room as the man who had destroyed their lives. And through it all, Wilson sat, expressionless, as though the lives he'd taken meant nothing to him. It was clear to everyone in the room that he was a man who felt no guilt, no empathy, just a chilling sense of entitlement to do whatever he wanted. The trial was a painful reminder that there are people out there capable of unimaginable cruelty. When the judge handed down Wade Wilson's death sentence in August 2024, the emotional weight of the moment was unbearable for the victims' families. Kristine Melton's father, who had been in the courtroom throughout the trial, spoke for the first time since the murders. "This is what justice looks like," he said quietly, his voice breaking as he looked at the man responsible for his daughter's death. "It won't bring her back, but it will make sure he never hurts anyone again." The families had waited years for this moment, and while it wasn't enough to heal their pain, it was something. It was justice, Delayed but finally served.
The case of Wade Wilson raises unsettling questions about mental illness, societal neglect, and the failure to intervene. Wilson's history of brain injuries, coupled with his escalating violent behavior, were clear warning signs, yet those around him failed to act. This case highlights the dangerous consequences of ignoring early signs of mental instability and violent tendencies. Could these tragedies have been prevented if someone had stepped in sooner? What does it say about our collective responsibility to recognize and address these warning signs before it's too late? It's a stark reminder that we must all be vigilant, because when we fail to act, innocent lives are lost. What are your thoughts on the role society plays in preventing violence like this? Let us know in the comments. What do you think could have been done differently to prevent this tragedy? Do you believe earlier intervention could have stopped Wade Wilson's descent into violence? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective on what could have been done to save these victims. The lessons we've learned from this case are crucial. Recognizing warning signs early on can make all the difference. Let's continue this conversation. Share this video with others so we can raise awareness about how we can better spot and act on these red flags in our own lives and communities. Together, we can help prevent future tragedies.